Parenting with another adult is often more complicated than we expect, not just practically, but also emotionally. Because parenting doesn't happen in a vacuum, it happens alongside our own life experiences, our own old hurts, our own childhood experiences of power, of being heard, of feeling safe. And when all of it comes together, our children, our relationships, the responsibility that we feel, and our own childhood wounds, it can feel confusing and painful and sometimes overwhelming in ways that are hard to explain. And while, of course, it's understandable that we might want to simplify all of this into a single actionable point, and that is a good move later on, what can really empower you as a parent and as a person is seeing and naming what is present in your own experience. Now, let's consider what this looks like in real life. I don't want to share the private inner struggles of the mums I work with, so this is a made-up scenario, but it highlights some of the very common feelings and conflicts that many mums experience. So, Joanne, our made-up mum, is co-parenting with her ex. She also lives with a new partner, and together they're raising 2 young children. There's nothing particularly challenging about their situation. They all get on well enough, but one afternoon, Joanne finds herself stuck in a moment of emotional paralysis that takes her by surprise. Her ex has just suggested he could take the kids out for a surprise trip at the weekend. But Joanne and her partner had been thinking about taking the kids out to the cinema, going for pizza, and just being together on a nice, low-key family weekend. And it's important to remember in this situation, no one's being unreasonable or trying to undermine anyone else, but still in that moment, Joanne freezes. She feels everything in her body tighten up and her thoughts scatter. And for a moment, she can't work out what she wants anymore and is filled with a kind of dread that whatever she chooses, someone will be unhappy. And worse, on top of that, she feels ashamed of how strong her reaction is. And she tells herself it shouldn't feel this hard. What Joanne doesn't realize at first is that this choice isn't just about the plans for the weekend. Growing up, her parents rarely agreed on what they would do together. Holidays and weekends were tense and decisions felt loaded. She learned early to stay quiet, to adapt and not take up space. So now as an adult, when she's caught between different adults, different preferences, and the well-being of her children, her body reacts before her thinking mind does. So she's filled with dread, with resentment at her ex, and then guilt because he's not really doing anything wrong, and then panic at the thought of her kids being disappointed if she says no. And of course, underlying all of this is just wanting things to feel more simple. And she freezes, not because she's incapable or unreasonable, but because her survival response is remembering something old and responding as if this moment carries more risk than it logically does. Now, as I said, even when everyone's on board and wanting to work together, these emotional undercurrents can absolutely add to the complexity of co-parenting. Not only does parenting awaken old childhood feelings in all of the adults involved, but your relationship with those other adults often presses on old childhood wounds. And as I said, because you're looking after children and their survival depends on you, the emotional stakes feel enormous. And so we end up assuming or reacting before thinking, and we can feel pulled in different directions and then judge ourselves for not handling it better. But this isn't a failure of understanding. It's the reality, the messy reality of many different layers in our experience. And that's just normal. Managing these emotions isn't though, about resolving these layers into a simple idea. It's not about saying, this is just my past, or I just need better boundaries, or key, if I understand this better, it won't hurt. Unfortunately, these conflicts and the complexity of these situations often does hurt, and that's unavoidable. The real emotional skill here is more than about allowing than solving. It's being okay with the fact that what you're experiencing is complicated. There are lots of layers to it. And some of these layers are quite old for you and the other adults involved. Some of them do definitely relate to what's happening right now. And all of them make sense. All of them have a place. And yes, it is confusing and often disorientating, which is why it's so important to have compassion for yourself, for your child, and where possible for the other adults involved. Compassion doesn't demand that everything be right. It doesn't impose standards of perfection or too high expectations. It doesn't demand that you fix everything so you can feel better right now. Instead, it helps us to soften. And in that softening, we can start to recognize, yes, it's complicated. Yes, everyone is actually trying their best. And in that softening, you get to choose a single action that helps right now. See how everyone does with that, and then do the same again in the next moment. And it might be the same choice, or it might be something completely different. Now, I do want to highlight, it is important to remember compassion doesn't mean ignoring reality. Sometimes another adult might not be cooperative. Sometimes another adult might be acting from their own needs or their own agenda. And sometimes protection matters more than collaboration. But even then, taking time to recognize and soothe your own emotional undercurrents before responding really matters. It's what allows you to make clearer decisions instead of panicking or collapsing. And I also want to look at this from your children's point of view. Children, thankfully, don't need perfect adults. They need adults who can stay present inside complexity. When you can slow down, soften, notice your own reactions, and respond thoughtfully, even if it's messy or imperfect, you're teaching your children something really powerful about how to live with difficult feelings. So, if co-parenting feels harder than you expected or more painful than you think it should be, there's probably a reason, and it deserves understanding and allowing, not self-criticism. This month, we're going to gently explore these layers together. So parenting doesn't have to mean overriding yourself or making yourself wrong to parent and co-parent well. If this resonates, I'd love you to follow or subscribe for the rest of the series. And inside the Calm Mum community, we'll be taking this understanding and slowly and safely turning it into practical ways of supporting you and your children, one moment at a time.